my career as a service provider, as a young medical doctor, being directly involved with survivors for almost 2 decades and more, I have understood that the way towards healing and overcoming personal trauma is through finding and creating a sense of agency, because this is exactly what is being taken away from them, from the survivors of sexual violence during the traumatic event. Through taking charge of their own narrative, through telling their own story in the way they choose, survivors reclaim their dignity and validate their sense of self. So it's so important to work with them and to empower them to feel themselves, to validate their stories, the society to recognize what's happened with them. So in our rehabilitation work with survivors, it became evident that survivor support group or self-supporting group, it was very helpful in boosting the effectiveness of the psychosocial support by providing them direct psychological care. Through supporting this group, we let them to participate together and break their shell. Some of them, they moved from this shell and they become activists, leaders, civil rights defenders, and they are resilient and support others also to break those barriers in society. In terms of creating safe space and protection, I think this is very important when we discuss how we will engage them, because this is the first condition, we think. What's mean that for the survivor? Survivors of conflict-related sexual violence, as all we agree and all we know, are very fragile and sensitive group due to the consequence they carry out by themselves. Besides the consequence, as individuals, also they have to deal not only with personal consequence, but also they face a lot of social stigma and prejudice, and not support as well as from community and their family. Therefore, when we carry out our approach, we work in different fronts, because it's not only a survivor itself that we have to work, but we have also to consider other needs which are surrounding her. We are thinking for family needs and community needs.
My name is Selvi Izeti. I'm a clinical psychologist working in KRCT since 2007, and I mainly work with survivors of sexual violence during the war. I'm glad that we are gathered together here to discuss a very sensitive and important subject like it is survivors' barriers in public engagement. As we know, public engagement of survivors is a core component of fighting stigma and prevention of sexual violence. And we all participate in public engagement through our day-to-day activities. It is very, very different when survivors are empowered and raise their own voice. I want to remind you that in Kosovo, for the first time in 2018, it was Vasfije Krasniqi, a survivor of sexual violence during the war, that shared her traumatic experience in public. And it was the first time that something like that happened in our country. So all this made a huge impact in our whole society. Her traumatic experience told by her touched everyone's heart and shake the foundation of every house here, I can say. In my clinical work, I have noticed that survivors after the treatment or even during the treatment feel a special need for their voice to be heard and their stories to be told. Taking into account that stigma is still present in every society regarding sexual violence, and even more probably in Kosovo, which has a patriarchal mentality. When we talk about challenges of barriers in public engagement for survivors, I can say that we notice that when the survivors deposit their evidence with the investigating police and the prosecutors, so in order to access justice, survivors are pushed to talk more about more details, which sometimes make the trauma worse and they feel traumatized. Therefore, it is very necessary that survivors are always accompanied by a psychologist or therapist during this process, in order to be offered the right help, and taking into account that the access to justice is a very vital step in helping survivors to repair and rebuild their lives. It is very important that people engaged in this process have to receive training on how to approach the survivors, ensuring that they are not traumatized all over again. What we all know, and I believe we all agree, is that survivors have a constant need for rehabilitation. So psychotherapy and having the survivors in the center, having the support from the family and all sectors of the communities will help actually survivors to heal, to empower, and to engage. So just in this way, they can regain control over their lives and they can have a sense of normal life again.
In our perspective, first, we try to ensure confidentiality, because this is the one that is crucial to start to engage or disclose the survivor. Then we have to sign the consent with survivor and try to establish joint objective, and we develop together. Secondly, we try to assure full understanding of the objective, because sometimes as a medical doctor, as a provider, we make the objective, but we have to know that sometimes the capacities of the survivor could be limited. So we have really to make sure that they understand clear and they are fully engaged, as well as we have to manage the expectation of the survivors. Third, we have, of course, to assess the potential risk and harms. And we need to get adequate risk mitigation measure, because sometimes exposing or engaging survivors, there might be also some risk, and survivors could be harmed or could have consequences in the family or community. Fourth, which is another step we are trying to establish, we try really to develop and maintain a relation with survivor, which allow us to provide her continuous care as much as she needed during the time she's exposed or is engaged in different activities. There are different ways in our organization as survivors, or in different layers of the organization as survivors are engaged. From our experience, I would like to share three of them. There are also survivors who are engaged in policy making, but the first one, I would like to share one of the survivors who now it's a community leaders. And when we met her and we offered to her service, she was very heavily cased with a lot of psychological consequences. And we had really to work with her carefully for many years in order to alleviate psychological suffering. But in the same time, we identified potential that she had it to be as a leader and the model for other survivors. So besides we had it later on to support her to establish her organization. We had it to support, to increase awareness on her community to accept this organization, because due to the taboo and stigma in our society towards survivors of sexual violence, it was not such easy to operate for her in that area. And right now we are still supporting her, mentoring her in her leadership capacity, as well as we are supporting her to fundraise. But what is important, she have now her organization in the most patriarchal area of Kosovo, and it's becoming a model for society. Of course, she is not yet disclosed, but most of the survivors who are coming there and benefiting from her services, they know that she is a survivor and they use her as a role model and they learn from her. The second example, which is well known now and has reached the parliament, is Vasfije Krasniqi Goodman. We decided to make her testimony publicly on 19th anniversary of Kosovo Rehabilitation Center for Torture Victims, which had a major echo through all the layers of society. But in order to engage Vasfije to become a survivor activist, of course, there were certain steps we had to take as a measure in order to prevent any harming or negative consequences that might occur after she will share her story. I would like to emphasize the crucial importance of finding a momentum when we are going in public with a story, because I think there are some preconditions to maximize our impact. We cannot bring in different moments. If the society is overwhelmed from political crisis or there are any threatened factors outside, I think if we bring in the public the story of the victim, do not have any kind of echo or any kind of impact that we want to reach. So in this case, we didn't need to, we needed, in her case, we didn't need to ensure physical protection because she lived in US, as I said, but we had to discuss carefully with her the impact of her testimony and prepare her psychologically to share. So we tried to create a momentum when Vasfije will come, really her story to have a great impact in society. So finally, we decided on 13th of October 2019 to be as an event dedicated to her stories, which gathered more than 200 participants, including survivors, MPs, ministers, civil society, artists, community, and others.
My name is Vasfije Krasniqi Goodman. I'm from Kosovo. I had a normal childhood back in the 80s, 90s in the former Yugoslavia. I was 15 when the war broke out in 1998. In 1999, after I turned 16, I was abducted by a Serbian police officer, and I was raped and tortured by 2 Serbian men, and I was denied justice. And to me, it felt like worse than being tortured and everything else, because when justice is denied, that's something that hurts you even more after the crime is done. With my case, I was open, or I can say I was free to discuss with my family and with my close friends, but I never shared my story with public. Until 2017, I decided to write an open letter to the rapist. And I shared it on Facebook, and I got a lot of support from back home, from people in the United States, because that's where I live now. I decided that maybe that's what survivors need. They should be able to share their stories and receive support. So I contacted Dr. Feride Rushiti through her organizations, and we decided that it was time for me to speak up and share my story with the public in Kosovo. Kosovo had heard many, many stories before mine, but they always hid their identity, always covering the face, changing their voice, so no one could put a story with a face because they were always covered. But I decided to go with my full name without hiding my identity. It was very difficult, and still is, even 3 years later. Sometimes when I think to myself, I wonder, how was I so brave to do that? But I think it was the right step to do. And ever since then, I became an activist. I got to testify at the US Congress for the Kosovo war crimes done by Serbians. I got to share my story a couple of times with the United Nations in New York and Geneva and a few other places. I think after I spoke in Kosovo, it gave the survivors some hope that society and the families would understand them better. And I always say, even if the survivors are not ready to share their stories, they don't want to be in public, at least I hope they have the freedom to be able to talk to the family members in the open instead of keeping it just inside themselves, because there's a lot of survivors that nobody knows that they are survivors. I have survivors contact me and they say, Vasfije, you're the only one that knows. I don't even have the strength to go to an organization because they are scared of they're going to be known. So that's what we've been working on, trying to give free space, even if it's at home, to be able to talk. So far, we don't have another survivor that is ready to speak up, but I'm hoping they will on their own time when they're ready. Just like for me, nobody pressured me, nobody pushed me. It was my own will that I wanted to share the story, but I'm thankful I did it. I decided to join a political party and run for the parliament member, and so I'm hoping to make some changes when it comes to just have one perpetrator behind the bars for the rape crimes, and we have over 20,000 survivors. And to me, that's beyond. It's unbelievable. It's not something that we can continue to live with. We have to fight justice, and I'm hoping to be able to do that within Parliament, starting there, and work with the organizations and be able to focus on stigma, focus on justice as my main goal.
So third example, which I would like to share with you, who take this award, is Feride Suleimani, another survivor who for the first time publicly filed her case in the state prosecutor. So with her, we had a different objective. We didn't want to address the stigma. Of course, also, stigma is always part of the process, and we had to address it. But the main objective, it was to empower all the survivors to seek justice. Why? Because from war and now, we don't have a single case who win the justice. So for that reason, Feride was another dimension as we scale up and we brought it in different perspective. Also, bringing Feride, it was very important to prepare her psychologically, as well as to prepare the state prosecutor office, how to receive her, how to communicate with her, and it was done in the presence of media, but she didn't share the story, because if she will share the story, and she decided by herself, which was really crucial part to learn, to teach us how to empower all the survivors, because if she will share the story, then all the survivors would think that in order to receive justice or to start, let's say, cooperation with the state prosecutor office, you have to make your story public. So for that reason, she was just having a short press release to the media, and then went to the state prosecutor office and start to establish contact, and she's continuing with them in order to receive the justice.